Hello and welcome to November's edition of Patch Tuesday Updates. I'm joined as always by Rob Brown, Absolute Security's very own Patch Tuesday guru, who's going to run us through the vulnerabilities highlighted this month and give you the best advice possible on how to patch for them. Looks like a more manageable amount compared to October, but a weaponized vulnerability in the wild? Should we be worried? Take it away, Rob.
Thanks, Justine. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today on a very beautiful November day here in the UK. We're very, very close to the end of the year. After last month's huge Patch Tuesday, we do have a much smaller one to look at today. We still have some very important things that we're going to talk about today. But before we actually start talk about patching, let's just talk about the Windows lifecycle. Now, we did say last month goodbye to Windows 10 after a very, very long time. We had the last update for Windows 10. Now, if you do have Windows 10 devices and you still need to patch them, you will need to go to a special subscription, which is a very special license for Windows 10. We believe if they followed the trends for the Windows operating systems that went end of life already this decade, that you will probably get 3 additional years, and in each year you have to pay a license that builds on the previous year's license, meaning that you buy ESU year 1 and then next year you will buy ESU year 2. You must have the previous year in order to build on the previous, and it does get quite expensive. So I do recommend you move to Windows 11 or any other operating system that is in support as urgently as possible. Windows Server is one of those extendable licenses. We are currently in year 3 right now. That will go end of life next year in October. Windows 11 Enterprise 22H2, it might be a surprise to you. Windows 11, it has 22H2 already now end of life as of last month. And this month we had Windows 11 Home and Pro 23H2 go end of life as well. So you do need to keep maintaining both the operating system itself and the feature update in order to remain compliant. Windows 11 Enterprise 23H2, that's just gone golden. So you have 1 year left on 23H2. We do recommend 24H2 as the feature update for now. It is November. In January, we will be recommending 25H2, which is the very latest version of the feature update for Windows 11. We are testing it. We're finding it to be very reliable. However, we like to have a number of months, approximately 3 to 4 months from its release date before we recommend our customers go to that version. So 24H2 is currently the recommended version. Around January time, as long as we don't see any issues, 25H2 will be our priority and will be our recommendation for customers to upgrade to. That doesn't include any long-term servicing branch. So if you're still using Windows 10 or 11 on a long-term servicing branch, which is an LTSC or an LTSB license, I think you have till 2030. One thing to note about the life cycle, it isn't just the operating system that stops getting patches. We have been advised by several customers that antiviruses will also require support for the operating system as well. So once you get to the end of life of the operating system, it is possible and has happened in the past that certain software, including security tools that you're using to keep your environment safe, will go end of life as well for that operating system. Now, if we take a look at Patch Tuesday, we had half the number that we had last month. We still had 5 criticals. Last month was 5 criticals. You might be wondering why that is the case. We believe it's because there are no .NET framework updates at all in this release, and that hasn't happened this year. 58 of the 63 are important, but as I repeat, we don't have any .NET framework updates this year. Very interesting that we've had no updates. We are expecting updates to be available. They could be released through the out of bound or out of update release. So please be sort of looking at the at your consoles for any new content that might appear after today. If anything like that does happen, we generally put out an email to our customers or to put it on the blog site. But some of those .NET Framework updates are super serious from previous months, so be on the lookout for those. In this release, we had 5 which are more likely to be weaponized. One was weaponized, not one of the 5 actually was weaponized, which is really good. We are going to talk about that weaponized vulnerability, and it's rather interesting that it's become weaponized, in fact, but I'll get more into it later. We have 0 that are public aware, and we do have 5 jump points, and we're going to discuss those 5 jump points a little bit later as well. Now let's look at our leaderboard. Now our leaderboard has been the same leaderboard for 3 months in a row. I didn't actually need to change any of the ordering of the leaderboard, just the number, which is really interesting because the most serious type of vulnerability is remote code execution, but for the 5th or 6th month in a row, elevation of privilege has been the winner. So we have 29 vulnerabilities of elevation of privilege. That's where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization tools that are on the operating system, and grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. The most serious is remote code execution. We have 15 fixes. That's a class of cyber attack in which attackers remotely execute commands to place malware or other malicious code on the network or the computer. Information disclosure. That's when a system unintentionally reveals sensitive information. For example, a memory leak from the CPU or the memory module that allows you to read passwords in clear text. We have 12 of those. Denial of service, just simply making the system unavailable. We have 3 of those fixes in this month, 2 spoofing and 2 feature bypass vulnerabilities to talk about as well. Now, if you are building a patching strategy, this is our recommended patch risk profile. It's how you can build a selection criteria for the patches that cover the risk of your organization, and every environment is completely unique. Now, if you're an absolute customer, you will have access to this data inside your console. If you're not, don't worry, we're going to give you a really cool sheet at the end where we can help you to build your patching strategy. So surrounding your risk, there are several elements to a vulnerability that will help you choose which vulnerability is more important to you, and therefore prioritize the patch deployment for that vulnerability remediation, starting with the vendor severity. Now, the vendor severity issues the severity for their patch, and they have their own internal calculation that warrants that vulnerability being critical, high, or important, medium, low, or NA severity. From time to time, vendors do release their patches with a severity that may not jump out at you as being critical to your organization. That is why we feel you need more than one element to prioritize a particular patch for remediation. So that's why we also recommend the CVSS score. Now, the CVSS score isn't owned by the vendor. It's actually an independent calculator assigned to a vulnerability based on a really complex calculator that actually explains how simple or not that vulnerability can be exploited, what kind of damage can be made if that vulnerability was exploited, etc. And that calculator is out of 10. So based on the calculator, you get the score out of 10 that allows you to see 10 being critical equivalent and NA being the NA equivalent. Now, if you put the two together, and we recommend that you do use both of these together, you have some kind of independent selection on a severity of a vulnerability. Sometimes Google Chrome, for example, just calling them out, where they will release an update for Google Chrome that is weaponized, but the severity will be NA. The CVSS might be 8.3 or 8.5. in that scenario, you've caught the vulnerability with the CVSS severity, not just using the vendor severity alone. The next is the state of the vulnerability. Now we have two states. One is called a weaponized vulnerability. Weaponized with an S or a Z means the same. Weaponized means that the vendor has identified that the exploit is under active attack or could be under active attack. That is a distinction. It might be under attack. It also might not be under attack, but there's evidence to suggest that it could be used. Now, when a vulnerability is weaponized, it kind of has a more urgency. It's a way of overriding the severity. If something is under active attack, go ahead and deploy it anyway. I certainly wouldn't want to be an IT manager that saw a low severity vulnerability that was being actively attacked and didn't prioritize it. So you can use weaponized as a very special selection criteria for automatic deployment of patches based on that state. Public aware doesn't mean you're learning about it from me on this webinar, I'm sorry to say. It means that somebody has published the exact blueprint to exploit. This is often via bug bounty programs, and these happen every month all over the world, where white hat hackers are able to present their code and how certain exploits are made. Vendors do get the opportunity of providing fixes for them in advance, but if those vendors don't say provide patches quick enough, then that code can be released. And we found a lot of vulnerabilities being explained how to exploit on YouTube, can you believe? So that you know how to protect your organization when a vendor doesn't release patches. That leads directly on to our countermeasure. Now, when a vendor doesn't provide a patch, or when a vendor does provide a patch, they sometimes release mitigations or workarounds. We call those countermeasures. That's where there is something that you can do to effectively resolve the vulnerability without the patch. So a countermeasure is a mitigation. So they might suggest that certain antivirus tools or certain versions of that software are vulnerable. You might also have workarounds. So they may provide you guidance on registry keys or changes to the operating system that you can remotely modify. If you have a systems management tool that allows you to modify registry keys and security settings on the device, you can effectively deploy those countermeasures, and that will stop the vulnerability from being exploited. Now, whenever you are using countermeasures, do pay attention to the vendor's recommendation. I like to mention this every single month. If you are using a countermeasure, which could be a registry key, could be a setting, a permission that you are changing that stops that vulnerability from being exploitable. If the vendor recommends that you undo the countermeasure, please go ahead and do that. It's very, very important that you do. Leaving registry keys on systems that are used once to countermeasure a vulnerability should not be left unless they're completely harmless. At some point in the future, a hacker might use that registry key that was placed there as a countermeasure for something else. And if that looks like a part of the Microsoft ecosystem, then the Microsoft ecosystem may not know that that's not actually a real setting, and therefore potentially be used to spread an exploit you didn't even think you could that you could be exploitable from. So please pay attention. If the vendor recommends to undo the countermeasure, please go ahead and do that. And lastly, your exposure is the most important thing in the risk profile, because every organization is unique. And what you might find is that based on your exposure, certain vulnerabilities will become a priority because they're higher exposed, instead of just deploying everything that is critical or high. You can actually take into consideration exposure based on weaponized or public aware status as well. So once a vulnerability gets a high exposure, you can start immediately rolling out those weaponized vulnerabilities, sort of resolve those with the patches, even even if the severity isn't very high. So take that into consideration. You also don't have to deploy all of the patches at the same time. So this is a very common trend now where following Patch Tuesday, you will use a time delay and you will use sort of the publish date with the severity to wait a number of days following testing and then deploying the critical vulnerabilities after, say, 5 to 7 days, and anything between 7 and 10 days, you'll do the high severity ones next. This is very, very useful if you are in an organization um, around multiple continents where you simply don't have the ability to deploy everything at once over the network. So by deploying them slowly and more often based on that risk, you can actually lessen the disruption on networks, which lessens the disruption on end users, which is really, really important. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to pop over to the Absolute website. So if you pop over to absolute.com on Patch Tuesday, this is when we actually publish the article that I'm actually going to show you right now. A day later, we release this webinar to YouTube, and we're very thankful for you joining us today. If you come over to the resources section, under resources sections, you'll find all of our fantastic library data, including our blogs. We have lots and lots of releases of really, really useful information, from zero trust to how to enable resilience in your IT operation, of course, our Patch Tuesday articles as well. Now, like I mentioned, we didn't have a huge release, but we do have some pretty important ones to talk about. In fact, this month, we're going to talk about a similar vulnerability that we highlighted last month, again, around graphics. Isn't it interesting that we've had quite a few graphics vulnerabilities fixed over the last couple of months, and I'm pretty sure they haven't quite got to the bottom of those vulnerabilities. But the first one is CVE 2025-60724. This is a GDI plus remote code execution. It's in the Microsoft graphics component, and this allows an attacker to execute code over the network. It is the one with the highest CVSS score today, 9.8. Its severity is important. Isn't that interesting? So a CVSS score of 9.8 should be critical. Microsoft released this as important. That's why it's so important to have multiple selection criteria for patch deployment. Its attack vector is over the network, which means over the network, which means any network. So it could be the internet, could be local, could be LAN, could be WAN. Its privilege required is none, with no user interaction and low attack complexity. Now, this flaw could enable attackers to trigger remote code execution through a crafted image or meta file content handled by a network-facing service. So anything that uses kind of image parsing is a top priority for you today. Now, my second is an interesting vulnerability. I've looked into this. Nuance PowerScribe CVE 2025-30398. Why is it in my recommendation? Why is it unique? Because Microsoft hasn't actually provided a patch. Now, PowerScribe is a leading healthcare solution used in radiology. And it uses AI to help recognize certain things in the healthcare industry. It's very, very popular. Now, although they've released guidance that this vulnerability is critical, it has an attack vector of network with no privileges required, attack complexity low, they haven't provided a patch. What they've actually recommended their customers to do is to contact your customer success manager at Microsoft. So either contact your customer success manager at Microsoft or your technical support for the patch itself. So interesting and worrying, especially if you're in healthcare and you are using PowerScribe. There is no auto update mechanism for this. Now, Nuance is actually a vendor that Microsoft has acquired. So I imagine that very soon these updates will become part of the standard Microsoft ecosystem. But if you are a Nuance PowerScribe customer, please do start making a phone call to your customer success manager at Microsoft and get those updates. It's very, very serious. My third recommendation is CVE 2025-62199. This is a Microsoft Office vulnerability. Microsoft Office vulnerabilities, of course, it probably is the tool that's on every single operating system. This is a use after free that can allow an attack if somebody opens up an email or crafted file. However, the preview pane is an attack vector. So super interesting. So you don't have to open the email in order to be exploited by this vulnerability. If you have an email that you're not sure, you just click it. If embedded inside the email, you have that macro or a file within the email that you simply click and read in the preview pane, that can actually send through the attack to your PC. And unfortunately, you might be open to further execution on your device. Is the preview pane useful in your organization? If it is, have protection around the auto running of macros. Don't let macros run automatically on your system is one way. And if you don't feel that the preview pane is actually a useful tool in your organization, think about turning it off, especially if you're going to be opening up lots of files. My fourth recommendation, CVE 2025-60716. This is a DirectX. So again, it's another graphics vulnerability. This is in memory, so improper memory handling allows the elevation of privilege vulnerability to impact your system. CVSS is 7.0. Its severity is important. Now, they're talking about this being one of the scope change or the vulnerabilities that have lateral movement. If you can exploit this vulnerability, you can gain system level access into the device, and then you can have a little walk around inside the network, even exploiting code and vulnerabilities that aren't specific to DirectX. So although you came in through the DirectX vulnerability, you can move sideways into other technology on the PC and in the network. And once that happens, it's really, really tricky to detect what's happening. And my last and final of the 5 is Visual Studio Remote Code Execution Vulnerability 2025-62214. Extremely serious this. It's actually last year, there was a software vendor that had a vulnerability very similar to this, not with Visual Studio, but actually what happened when they were exploited. Now, this is a heap buffer flow vulnerability in Visual Studio. Visual Studio, of course, is a tool that is developing software, it's developing code. Now, the developer itself has quite a high blast radius, because if you're producing code software, even the very tools that we're using to watch this webinar is probably been built on Visual Studio code. If you can somehow exploit that and place something into that code, you actually risk your supply chain, and you have supply chain compromise. Extremely serious there. So if you do use Visual Studio, and I understand not every device will, but they are probably developers that need to be patched urgently. Please do make sure that that it is patched. It doesn't have a high CVSS, only 6.7, but the vendor Microsoft does issue this a severity of critical. Again, why you want to take both into consideration when you're putting your patching strategy together. I highly recommend that be your 5th priority. Now, risk for lateral movement, these are the vulnerabilities that have a scope change. Again, that means that if you can exploit the vulnerability through that particular vulnerability, you can move sideways. They are the most serious and the hardest ones to catch. And now a vulnerability that has a risk for lateral movement, also called a jump point, they don't always carry a severity of critical, high, or medium. In fact, we've seen lows and NAs this year already. So do make sure, pop those CVEs into your tool set and make sure that you're closing those gaps. If you're not an absolute customer, as I mentioned, we have a really cool download. This is our risk scoring sheet. Just go ahead and we'll look at that in just a second. Now, if you, my recommendations for patching, especially if you're going to be making a New Year's resolution next month, take the priorities of the vulnerabilities seriously and use your own calculator to prioritize the vulnerabilities that cover the risk you're not prepared to take. Put the selection together, use your toolset, and deploy them according to that priority. Don't be fearful of a vulnerability causing end user disruption to stop you from remediating. It's the worst thing that an IT manager can do is to go on the internet and to see that somewhere some users are being impacted by a patch. Use an effective testing strategy, make sure that they get tested, and then deploy. If you're an absolute customer, you obviously have the resilience capability. We have the ability at scale to restore a device if it has been impacted by an update that has caused end user disruption. If you're not an absolute customer, though, do try to build in that leverage of resilience however you can so that you don't not deploy an update that could cause you more disruption if you get hit with ransomware. And lastly, my recommendation is to continue to monitor. As you're deploying these updates, don't just look at how successful it has been the week before you deliver your reports to your CISO. Look at this weekly and often. Make sure that your patches are being remediated. Any issues with the end user devices, like they're switched off or they've got low disk space, super easy to address. Don't leave it to the last minute. Use automated reports to help you get that data in your mailbox so you can just see and validate, yes, my patching is working well. And that will make sure that you don't have any sort of last minute nightmares when producing the reports for your CISO. Last thing I want to show is the download. This is our Honey download based on the risk score. So we take all the vulnerability data that I mentioned, we put it into a score out of 100. Right now, the GDI is at risk score 80. So this is by far the most serious. If we want to look at the weaponized vulnerability, we actually need to go right the way down to the third page. That does not mean, however, I'm recommending you don't deploy this. I'm saying that actually, based on the data that was available and the risk and the CVSS and the vendor severity, all that data put together, this actually only carries a score of 26. I do, however, recommend if you have weaponized vulnerabilities in your organization with high exposure, do make sure that you prioritize those, deploy those separately using any kind of automated mechanism you have so that you don't have to worry about those actually targeting your organization. Thank you so much for joining me today. We really appreciate it. There's only one more left of the year, and we look forward to joining you again in December for another Patch Tuesday. Until next time, happy patching.
Thanks, Rob. It's always good to hear your sage advice, and I love the idea of a Schrodinger's vulnerability. Talking of sage advice, before we go, I'd like to share that our own CISO, Harold Rivas, will be looking again in depth at the cyber resilience challenges faced by all CISOs on his LinkedIn live broadcast. This month's episode will be on the 19th of November at 8:40 Pacific time, and Harold will be sharing his experience and tips on how to improve your resilience. You can register for the live sessions or watch an on-demand episode using this QR code. If you're in need of specific advice about resilience or patching, then please contact us via the website, or you can use this code here. And now, a quick note on personal cyber safety. A massive credential stuffing data breach was made public this week. And when I say massive, it was around 2 billion sets of credentials that were included. This wasn't a single company hack. This was a compilation breach, pulling together huge amounts of stolen usernames and passwords from previous leaks and stealer log malware. If you have any kind of dark web monitoring in place, you may already have received an alert. But if you don't, I strongly recommend registering your personal email addresses with Have I Been Pwned to check if they appear in the dataset. And of course, please make sure you're using multi-factor authentication, especially on your email accounts, and a good password manager. With Black Friday coming up later this month, a time when online scams spike, please stay vigilant. This is exactly the kind of event attackers take advantage of. Once again, thanks for watching this broadcast. And finally, don't forget to like and subscribe.